Nowadays, multiple countries compete all around the world in more aspects than just the export and import of goods and services. The world has never been so accessible, and thanks to this, millions of people all around the world have obtained the opportunity to visit other nations. The two biggest superpowers in the world today, the United States and China, compete in practically all areas. This includes economics, military, technology, diplomacy, and also in education. China's economic transformation from being an exporting country to an economic superpower has also made strides in the education of its population. Back in the 80s, China only had a literacy rate of about 79%. Now, their literacy rate is at an astonishing 99%. The Chinese educational revolution has been one of the largest educational projects in history. Since 1998, China has invested massively in education, nearly tripling the share of GDP devoted to it. In the previous decade, the number of universities in China has doubled, and the number of students has increased fivefold. This revolution has caused a great change in the distribution of the world population of university graduates. For decades, the US had the highest proportion of people attending university. They had been dominating the graduate market. Reflecting this old supremacy, among people aged 55 to 64 years old, almost a third of all graduates in the world's major economies are American. But that is rapidly changing among the younger generations. In terms of graduate production, China has outperformed the US and the combined university systems of the European Union nations. Today we will see the extent of Chinese education in the world, and we will also address the question whether the United States could eventually give up its position as the main educational power in the world. Today, the student debt problem in the US is so great that it has reached a whopping $1 trillion. That equates to the entire GDP of Argentina, Colombia, Ecuador, and Peru combined. Most universities in the US can easily cost around $25,000 to $30,000 per year, and private universities can cost much more. So, for most Americans, in order to pursue their careers, it's almost an obligation to take loans or use their family fortune in order to afford their education. Even for many American students, it has been impossible to attend university, but curiously, there have been many foreign students who are willing. In fact, the majority of foreign students who study in the US pay much more than the average American student. A foreign student could easily pay about $45,000 or $60,000 for just 1 year of education, not even including the living costs. Who could pay such high sums of money without the possibility of working, since the US doesn't allow it? The answer is that the majority of foreign students in the US do not come from traditionally rich nations such as the UK, France, or Japan. The US, in fact, has the largest population of foreign students in the world, exceeding more than 1 million. The vast majority of foreign students in the US comes from China, which currently has 360,000 students, followed by India with nearly 200,000 students. These two countries make up over half of foreign students in the United States. With China taking up more than 32% of the cake, China has already become one of the largest exporters of students in the world. In France, the Chinese are already the third largest group of foreign students, just after the Algerians and Moroccans. The same situation is reflected in many other European countries where China already contributes to the largest group of foreign students. And this trend is not a coincidence. The enrichment of the Chinese population has motivated families to send their children abroad, especially recognized educational powers such as the US, France, Germany, England, and Australia. It is not surprising that the Chinese elite send their children to these countries and to their most elite universities. For example, the only daughter of the Chinese president Xi Jinping studied at Harvard. While Chinese students represent 36% of foreign students in the US, they only represent 1.24% of all students in the country. An article this year declared that foreign students contribute to more than $22 billion to the economy of the US. Universities with financial difficulties are actively recruiting students from abroad, and the number of first-year students in the US has almost tripled since the recession of 2008. The increase in income seems to be a key factor in hiring Chinese students, which sometimes causes universities to choose the financial benefits over academic integrity. Other countries such as France have already taken steps to obtain some economic benefit from the vast amount of Chinese students. Higher education in France is in fact free for both the French and foreigners. At least, it was, up until last year's education reform. This reform required new foreign students from outside the European Union to pay between 3,000 and 4,000 euros per year. This measure is practically designed to do two things. The first is to increase the income of the French universities with an increasing number of Chinese students with greater purchasing power, but also to reduce the number of students coming from the African continent that currently represent 45% of foreign students in the country. The massive influx of Chinese students has filled public and private universities in the US, and this has motivated Ivy League American universities to open up several campuses in mainland China. China has also done the same, but not with its universities, but with its Confucius institutes all around the world, expanding and making known the Chinese language and culture. This educational and cultural exchange has been typically seen as a good thing during the last decade. However, in recent years, due to the rising tensions between DC and Beijing, between the two countries' tech giants, Apple and Huawei, the expansion of Chinese technology has taken its toll on the relations and sentiment of Chinese students in the US. DC suspects that the Chinese government is using its sponsorship of the Confucius Institutes to promote pro-Chinese propaganda on US campuses. It would also be believed that there is spying being done on Chinese students in the US, with limiting effects on academic freedom. In the US, Australia, and other countries, concerns have been raised about whether Chinese students and researchers, some of who apparently hide close ties with the Chinese military and the Communist Party, are using their access to laboratories and research centers to steal intellectual property or patents. In June of last year, the US shortened the duration of 5-year visas to 1 year for Chinese graduate students studying aviation, robotics, and advanced manufacturing. Officials in the United States said that the goal was to reduce the risk of espionage and theft of intellectual property in areas vital to national security. But now, the Trump administration is considering whether to subject Chinese students to further investigation before attending a school in the US. The Chinese government has repeatedly insisted that DC has exaggerated the problems for political reasons. The ambassador of China in the US states that their accusations toward China were unfounded and indecent. One of the attacked objectives of the government of the US were the Confucius Institutes, Chinese linguistic and cultural centers financed by the Chinese government in some 100 American campuses. The US government has accused the centers of being spying centers and propaganda weapons of the Chinese government, and they have been pressured to register as foreign agents. A defense spending bill was enacted last summer, which banned universities with Confucius Institutes to use federal funds for training in the Chinese language. In the last year, more than half a dozen universities have announced that they will close their Confucius Institutes. One of the most recent had been the University of Rhode Island, which decided to close the institute due to the lack of federal funds. In 2006, there were about 10,000 Chinese students that graduated from American universities at the graduate level. By 2016, there were more than 140,000 Chinese undergraduate students in the US. However, by the start of 2017, a negative trend began, and the number of Chinese students began to decline for the first time in more than 2 decades. The reason for this is very clear and obvious. The attitude of the White House and the anti-Chinese rhetoric has caused many Chinese to return to their country after their studies, or in some cases, they have even interrupted their studies. The student environment for foreign nationals in the US has degraded. Some universities in Oregon and Illinois have seen a significant decrease in the enrollment of Chinese students this year. The wealthy Chinese families look to the US as a place where an academic degree guarantees a good working future, either in the US or China. However, more and more Chinese students are beginning to stay in the States after their studies. China is a country with 40 universities within the best 500 universities in the world. Thus, China has already exceeded France last year, which has only about 35 universities within the top 100. China is a country with 40 universities within the best 500 universities in the world. Thus, China has already exceeded France last year, which only has about 35 universities within the top 500. The only countries that are currently above China is the US, the UK, and Germany. In fact, it could even be said that China would have an academic level higher than that of the US. This is verified last year by the PISA report, which are a result of academic tests based on the students' mathematical, reading, and analysis skills. The latest PISA report was made in 2015, and the new report will be revealed by the end of this year. But for the moment, using the last report, we can see that China is in 10th place in terms of the maximum score, above countries such as Germany, the Netherlands, or even Australia. The territory of Hong Kong is not yet fully incorporated into China, and it is the country with the second highest score in the report, only surpassed by Singapore. Neither the US, nor the UK, nor France, or even Sweden obtained a score higher than 500, which would place them within the yellow range of countries that can be observed. Education has become something so primordial in China that, for example, the entrance exam to enter a university is so difficult that adolescents prepare almost their entire life for the exam, especially from the age of 13. The exam lasts 2 full days for more than 12 consecutive hours. This is the exam that will define the university and faculty in which students will go to and in the end, mark their future. In 2014, 75% of Chinese students passed, but only 3% went to the best universities in the country. And this exam is so serious that if you are caught cheating, you'll be sent to prison for 7 years. In 2014, it was estimated that 90% of adolescent suicide had to do with the anxiety generated by this test, known to be the most difficult in the world. For the most brilliant in the country, China gives the opportunity to go abroad and study either in a graduate or doctorate program, especially in the natural sciences. One of the conditions, however, is that they are required to return to the country and apply what has been learned in order to avoid brain drain. ASPI, the intelligence unit for The Economist, predicts that China will have the largest amount of graduates in the areas of science, technology, engineering, and mathematics by 2030, surpassing the United States for the first time ever. Meanwhile, China continues to send more students abroad than any other country in the world. According to UNESCO, there are as many as 1 million Chinese students studying outside of the country, despite recent claims that recent graduates are having trouble reintegrating back into the country after their studies. This number is still continued to grow every year. For many in China, having Western education and professional experience is a good addition to their CV to avoid unemployment. But what is clear is that China is taking more and more prominence from the US in the area of education. It has already surpassed the US in terms of academic performance, as the PISA report shows. It has also overtaken France as the 4th country in the world with the best universities. And soon, it is expected that they will overtake Germany as well. The rivalry between the two greatest superpowers in the world span not only in politics, economics, but also in education as well. And in the coming years, we will see how far China can overtake the US in this aspect, and if they will overtake the US in other aspects as well, in their attempt to be the superpower of the world. So what do you think about the educational system that China is implementing? Do you think that the US suspicions are correct, that China is using its graduates to spy on American technology? Leave your comments below. I hope you liked this video, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more content like this every single week. See you next time.